Pilot's chair is Tyler Nixon, and we have an extraordinary show for you today. You almost don't know where to start. I've never been in any period in American history where news broke this quickly. Just in the last week, we've learned that the NSA had been illegally surveilling U.S. citizens under the Obama administration. And had been chided. You got me. And had been chided by the FISA court for those improprieties. Tyler, are you with us? All right, so we also have this extraordinary story that really tops anything that I've seen in American politics, that James Comey, the FBI director, essentially shut down the investigation and decided not to prosecute Hillary Clinton regarding her illegal email server because of a document in the possession of the FBI which purported to show that the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, had assured a leader of Hillary's campaign that the Justice Department would not go very deeply into this issue. The FBI now knows that this document is a fraud. It is a forgery. The supposition is that this was created by the Russians. But to the extent that Mr. Comey had any plan for revenge or any plan for a comeback or any plan for a counterattack against Donald Trump, I think he just went out the window with this incredible story. I mean, it appears like the Russians or someone completely conned the FBI. And then, of course, we have the news that Hillary Clinton has not gotten any better at history than she has politics. She spoke at Wellesley earlier today saying that President Nixon was impeached. Well, that's wrong. She, of course, should know she was fired from the House Impeachment Committee. It's interesting that her supporters have created a fake narrative online during the presidential campaign claiming that that was not true, that Jerry Ziefman, who was both the chief of staff and the chief counsel to the House Impeachment Committee, did not have the authority to can her. He did have the authority, and he did fire her for lying. She also argued, by the way, that Richard Nixon was entitled to no legal counsel during the time of the impeachment. Clearly a violation of the Constitution. And now an incredible piece in New York Magazine in which Hillary says she beat both Bernie and Trump. Hillary, no, you didn't. They had to stop the count in Iowa because if they kept counting, you would have lost, and you would have lost the nomination as well. And perhaps they didn't teach you this in college, but the United States selects its president on the basis of the Electoral College, not the popular vote. Therefore, one calibrates their presidential campaign to the Electoral College, and there's a constant effort to try to determine where your 270 is. If the Clinton campaign was focused on the popular vote, well, that would be a rookie mistake. And then, of course, we have the news that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, is scheduled to, I guess the Senate Intelligence Committee has expressed a desire to talk to him about contacts he may have had with the Russians. There's a terrific piece by Eli Lake this week in which I totally agree. Let us not rush to judgment on Mr. Kushner any more than we do on General Flynn or Mr. Manafort or anyone else. I can speak for myself. I had no contact with the Russians, and no, my entirely public, fully disclosed, and completely benign exchange with Guccifer 2.0 does not constitute contact with the Russians, nor the inference that it is collusion is an absurdity. That was a dirty trick by Ross Story and a couple of these fake news sites. But I can tell you that we are hanging General Flynn and now Mr. Kushner without any facts, without a crime. Where is the underlying crime? I'm not saying that Jared Kushner did or did not talk to leaders in the Kremlin. But just doing so would not be illegal, would not be a violation of the law. The president is absolutely right. This is a witch hunt, and it is a scandal without evidence. And it has become a meme for the mainstream media who, like a dog with a bone, they will not drop the narrative. That despite the fact that Senator Feinstein, Dianne Feinstein of California, the ranking member of the Intelligence Committee, says that she has seen no evidence of Trump campaign collusion with the Russians. Even that hapless boob, Adam Schiff, said back in March that he had seen convincing evidence of Russian collusion. And then April 2nd, he said he's actually seen none. So which is it? My lawyers continue to talk to both the House and the Senate committees. I think the Senate should come first. They contacted me first. The Senate is the more senior body. And I am still reiterating my desire to testify, to do so without a subpoena, to do so voluntarily. By the way, Jared Kushner's lawyer has said the same thing. And I would like that, of course, to be in public. I request no immunity, and either is Mr. Kushner. So let's not hang Jared Kushner on the basis of a bunch of what may be fake news stories. A spokesman for the committee said they had a few questions that they wanted him to answer. Fair enough. But it would be unfair and inappropriate to convict Jared Kushner when there's still no evidence that he has done anything wrong. We are really, I think, in a position in which, while we have a special counsel to look into the Russian matter, I think we should have a special counsel to look into Obama's National Security Administration. We now know that the NSA under former President Obama routinely violated American privacy protections while scouring through the overseas intercepts of American citizens, and they failed to disclose the extent of this problem until the closing days of the administration, literally days before Donald Trump was elected. Had he not been elected, is there any doubt in your mind that this would never have come to light whatsoever? I give credit to, first of all, the folks at Circa News, who found the declassified documents, first obtained them, that showed that the super secret FISA court sharply rebuked the administration. And I also note the incredibly strong reporting of Chief Washington Correspondent for Fox Television, James Rosen, who got right to the heart of the matter, pointing out that the lawyers for the NSA informed the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that the NSA had systematically violated the rights of countless Americans. So why not a special prosecutor, actually a special counsel is the technical term, for this particular crime? Oh, you haven't read about this in the Washington Post and the New York Times? You haven't seen it leading NBC or CBS? Folks, there's a news blackout on this development. But we now know that the president was absolutely right when he said that he was surveilled at Trump Tower. You may remember when Judge Andrew Napolitano was admonished and fined for saying that, only to be proven right just a few days later, about 2 weeks, actually. So we have to comment about what's going on at Fox News because, we are at the break. We'll be right back with the stone cold truth.
Hi, this is Bernie Sanders. And believe me, I know you may not believe me, but you gotta believe me. In my opinion, I like the Stone Cold Truth, and I listen to it.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone, the master of ceremonies, and I'm his co-host, Tyler Nixon. Well, Roger, I'm sorry for a little technical difficulty that I didn't catch your monologue, but I got the gist of it. It's this surveillance, this mass surveillance spying thing is just incredible. It's beyond belief, and it amazes me. You have to be in bed with this intelligence security super state, frankly, to not bring it out and not want to report on it. And that says a lot about our mainstream media sources.
It's really quite extraordinary, Tyler. You're absolutely right, because this should be leading the nightly news. This should be on page 1 of the Times and the Post and the Wall Street Journal, but you have to go digging for it. I give credit to the folks at Circa News, which is, I think you know, affiliated with the cable news network, and the excellent work there of John Solomon, who brought this whole question out. It is really, it's extraordinary. And James Rosen, who did a superb job on this. The other thing I'd have to point out,
who was spied upon, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. So the Obama White House had surveillance on a reporter. That's worse than anything Richard Nixon ever went down for. That's entirely unconstitutional, and it was secret, violation of his constitutional rights, and they paid no price for it. Then the other big news that we have to touch on is coming out of the G7 meeting last week. The president's chief economic advisor said that the President, Trump, went to the conference, this is in regard to climate change, to learn, that he came there to get smarter.
Jeez.
That's unbelievable. I mean, first of all, I think the president is smart enough to know that global warming is a hoax, and that there's a disparity of scientific opinion about this issue. The president now says that he is going to decide next week whether the United States will abide by the 2115 Paris Agreement on cutting global carbon emissions. This, of course, would be a reversal of the position he took during the campaign. So you can see that the president's chief economic advisor, Gary Cohn, formerly of Goldman Sachs, a liberal Democrat, and others, including H.R. McMaster's, are pushing the president to violate what he told the American people he would do during the election. This is part and parcel of the establishment effort to co-opt a man who could be one of America's greatest presidents. They are really trying to distract him from his agenda. It is deeply, deeply disturbing.
It's unprecedented, really. The Wall Street Journal reporting, I believe yesterday, that the president's coming back and there might be a serious shakeup in the offing. Of course, that's been on and off reported for the last probably 6 weeks or so. Also being reported is that Jared Kushner is a person of interest in the FBI probe, that he was recorded on I believe it's the surveillance of the Russian officials as wanting to set up a back-channel communication, quote, with the Kremlin, as if they're still Soviets, but and basically to, I guess, end run exactly what was really happening. They were being monitored and wiretapped and surveilled. And let's face it, we know that's the truth. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. The fact that that alone is not outrageous to reporters who, Obama, it's okay for him to wiretap James Rosen, to wiretap a Fox reporter for under absolutely no legitimate pretense whatsoever. And, but they don't want to talk about the president-elect being wiretapped effectively. And I'm sure there's so much more to this story than we would ever. It would boggle the mind. But
well,
Jared.
But as I said, Tyler, in my monologue in the beginning, let's not convict Jared Kushner any more than we would convict Gerald Flynn or Paul Manafort. There is still no evidence of a crime. Now, clearly this is a big story, but Jared Kushner is innocent until proven guilty. There is no serious evidence of violation of law. Let's let this play out. You see, this is why I think the special counsel is a good thing, because the House and Senate Intelligence Committee proceedings are going to be a kangaroo court. They're going to be a bunch of preening, whining, ambitious politicians posing for the camera. Yeah, we're not going to get to the truth. This is going to be a BS fest.
The fact that you have not been called and given the opportunity to rebut what has all these scurrilous allegations against you is proof enough in itself. They're grandstanding, and they'll grandstand to the bitter end, just like Hillary's doing at her speech, their commencement speech she gave, which was pretty terrible. I mean, this woman is really just discrediting herself into oblivion, and that's where she deserves ignominious oblivion, and that's where she should remain. But unfortunately, like Obama, we're not going to hear the end of these people because they will just never shut up and let their leaders lead and let our system work. For those who, we elected President Trump, and she can talk about the popular vote all she wants. I mean, this is what they want. They want a kangaroo democracy where they can just stampede their way to power. And it's disgraceful. CNN this week, it's the worst. I mean, I was livid listening to Anderson Cooper run a story, for example, and I don't want to bring it up necessarily, but the Seth Rich. And I'm not going to comment on the substance or details of the Seth Rich story. But the bottom line is they ran about a 2-minute piece in which they talked about the controversy, talked about conspiracy theories, and their entire coverage of the actual facts of the event was that CNN debunked this weeks ago.
Yeah, I think this has to be visited. Let's go through what we know to be facts. Seth Rich indisputably headed the division, the IT division at the DNC, from which documents were purloined and published by WikiLeaks. That is a fact. The D.C. Metropolitan Police never questioned the bartender or any of the employees at the establishment where he was last seen, nor did they ask for the video cameras. There is a credible doctor, I did the research on this, who's come forward to say that Rich was alive when he got to the hospital and should have survived. No, I think there are legitimate questions. Just because you ask what happened does not make you a conspiracy theorist. In fact, the idea that his parents would ask that there be no discussion of this is jarring. If there's anybody who should want to know who killed their son, you would think it would be his parents, who are now represented, or at least were, by a crisis communications consultant who works for the Democratic National Committee. Folks, this stinks. It stinks.
And even if his parents had an inkling that their son was shot to death by these darker, deeper forces, what are they going to do? Take them on themselves? They would be scared out of their minds, I would think, and would probably just go along with what they're told by their crisis communication counselor or whatever it be. It's really
who has fired the private investigator, who is a former D.C. Metropolitan Police detective, very highly regarded and decorated. And he tells us that his sources in the department say that the computer most definitely shows that Rich was in touch with WikiLeaks. The Seth Rich scandal will be right back.
This is Bill Clinton, and you're about to enter the world of the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth. I'm your host, Roger Stone. Joining me is my co-pilot, Tyler Nixon, and on the line we have the Washington Bureau Chief for Infowars.com, Dr. Jerry Corsi joins us now. Welcome to the Stone Cold Truth, Dr. Corsi.
We're very pleased to be back. Thank you.
So we were talking about the Seth Rich matter. I know that you are on top of this and have been reporting it and will be reporting it for InfoWars. It seems like there is a massive international news blackout. We're being told we can't even discuss this. That the official House organ of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Washington Post, ran an op-ed late last week in which the family appeals for privacy. Now, I respect their right to privacy, but in my opinion, the American people's right to truth trumps their right to privacy. Why don't you give us the latest on the probe into Seth Rich's murder?
Well, Roger, I'm going to have at least three articles in a series in InfoWars next week, starting on Tuesday. And I'm doing a very systematic. I've found a few of the people inside the Democratic National Committee and related Democratic organizations that were willing to talk on a confidential basis. And I think I've really figured it out. I'm doing kind of like the full treatment. I mean, it's when you sort things out and don't let the confusion of the mainstream media try to make it muddy. It's very clear. For instance, I'm just going to start with one piece that I think people rarely distinguish. The first Guccifer who did the hack, was really hacking Blumenthal, and then found that seeing Hillary's emails between Hillary and Blumenthal, he realized Hillary had a private email address at this ClintonEmail.com. And so he hacked into Hillary's emails. Now, that's very different from some of these hacks are saying the Russians did. Guccifer 2, for instance, was not hacking into emails. And people rarely look at, well, what was he hacking into? What did he release? Where did he get that from? And when we sort all this pretty well through, it's clear that Seth Rich was not a hacker. He was a leaker. He got Podesta's emails. No one else had Podesta's emails. It was really this trove of emails that Seth Rich came up with, and he released them. WikiLeaks. That's the only place this trove appeared. I'm quite convinced, and I think I can prove it through some of the WikiLeaks documents that have been released, that it was the CIA that did the hacking of the Democratic National Committee's computers and into their data files. This was originally a CIA operation, and I think it's pretty clear from what WikiLeaks has released and what the CIA has released that we could prove that.
Would that explain why the folks at the Democratic National Committee would never let the FBI examine the servers?
That's right, because if we could examine the servers, I think you could prove it. That this was this was a CIA hit on the Democratic Party. And they decided they'd blame it on Russia. They made it look like Russia. But if you could trace back all the IP addresses and go through the methodology of it, I think it's very clear that this was one of the CIA attacks designed to blame it on the Russians and make it look like the Russians. And there's no evidence. I think Russia's entry into this was to basically try to save people like Seth Rich. When Russia realized what was going on, Russia tried to blow the whistle on that the CIA had been doing the hacking, and Obama threw them all out of the country. I think that's why he threw them out of the country. They wanted to tell the truth about who was doing the hacking.
Yeah, you can already see the narrative coming. When the evidence becomes overwhelming that Seth Rich was murdered for political reasons and not as part of a robbery, mark my words, suddenly the mainstream media will switch to, well, he was murdered by the Russians. That's where this is going next, because it fits their convenient and completely bogus narrative that the Russians were helping take Hillary down and that the Russians were helping Donald Trump, neither of which has been proved anywhere. And certainly there's no evidence that would stand up in a U.S. court of law. But you can already see this happening. In fact, let me give you the precursor to this, Jerry. You'll appreciate this. For years, they told us Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy and he acted alone. When the evidence began to show a conspiracy and the question was doubted, the establishment suddenly now says, all right, well, you're right, it was a conspiracy. The Russians did it. He was working for the Russians. That is, of course, as we now know, false. You're going to have the same argument here. Suddenly, Seth Rich is going to have been murdered by the Russians, which is, I think, as bogus as the rest of this.
And I think you're going to find out that there was, in both instances, the Russians that were trying to warn us that Kennedy was going to be assassinated, and that they're also trying to warn us that our CIA had gone rogue and was actually probably wiretapping. I don't think they could get into the Republicans because, see, that one of the other keys in understanding and unraveling this, which I'm going to explain, is the Democrats, the progressives, were so lax about Internet security or cybersecurity that they could have been hacked by, a 15-year-old kid with, a computer and some knowledge of what hacking is all about. Anybody could have hacked these people. I mean, the Democrats were like wide open. They were leaving themselves totally vulnerable. They were responding to phishing attacks. They were, their systems were so crudely protected that it would take very little of an expert hacker to gain access.
Well, and then we have the case of Craig Murray, who is a respected and entirely credible British diplomat, claiming that he was in touch with Rich and that Rich passed on documents to him that he passed on to Assange. That has never appeared in the New York Times. Never.
Correct.
It has been widely covered in the European press. And I did some research on Murray. He is entirely credible.
Well, see, the one of the keys to understanding this is that there wasn't one hack. There were multiple hacks going on. And the data that Guccifer got was voting data. He was hacking into the voting data computer system, which was totally different from the email system. And, there's no indication at all that Guccifer ever got into the email system. This is Guccifer 2 I'm talking about. And Guccifer 1 only hacked into Hillary's private email server. He never hacked into anything at the Democratic National Committee. And you can tell by the content of what they released who was doing the hacking and why.
Well, Jerry, we've got Nick Gillespie coming up in the next segment, and we're going to be having Luke Rosiak from the Daily Caller on later in the show. He's going to be discussing the but the IT scandal that's brewing over at the House of Representatives, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. So I want to thank you very much for coming on today and joining us. It's been always a pleasure to have you with us.
Great, my pleasure. Thank you. I look forward to getting this series of articles in InfoWars.com out starting on Tuesday through this coming week.
Sounds
Many
good.
thanks.
Thank you.
Well, you are listening to The Stone Cold Truth here on Genesis Communications Network. Roger Stone and Tyler Nixon. Stay with us.
Hi, this is former President Jimmy Carter. Rosalind and I like the Stone Cold Truth because, like me, Roger Stone always tells the truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth here on the Genesis Communications Network. I am Roger's co-host Tyler Nixon, and of course the master of ceremonies himself, Roger Stone. Joining us, a good friend of mine going way back to the early days of the Gary Johnson campaign. Nick Gillespie from Reason.com, editor-in-chief, a great American, a great libertarian, a great voice for freedom in this country. And welcome, Nick. It's always good to have you.
Thanks for having me. And once, many years ago, one of Roger's best-dressed men in America.
I was just about to say, a one-time he landed on Mr. Stone's international best and worst dressed list in the best dressed category. I think it was best impression of Johnny Cash. I think was the
That's right.
the category.
Yes.
If
I'm
anybody
wearing
could pull it
a
up.
short Western jacket. So,
Well, they call you the Jacket, Nick. I noticed in the Reason commentariat, which is, yes, you are definitely, and you, in my opinion, have the gravity of a Johnny Cash. So,
Nick has a great personal style. So, anyway, I'm going to let you guys talk about this movie because I'm obviously a biased party.
Right.
Well, if I can take the lead in that, the thing, and this is what I appreciate about the various books that you've put out, Roger, but also in the documentary, what I think it captures, which I did not fully appreciate, I think early on, but that you present American politics. There's like a finite number of topics or issues, and then it's a question of how the different parties or factions slice them up to try and get more votes for their side. And what you do is you totally jumble those categories in a way that I think is, frankly, very small L libertarian. I don't think you would disagree with that, but that's what is great about that movie is like it's not really about you being a dirty trickster or a character or even influential to Trump. It's that you're presenting American politics in a different way, where it's like the lifestyle politics and political governance. These are two very separate issues, and they should be kept separate because you don't want people telling you how to run your business, and you don't want people telling you how to run your personal life either.
Well, and
I think that's the value equation that you're bringing to politics, and that's why people are interested in it.
There are very, very few pundits who step forward and say, let's face it, folks, both parties are full of crap. Every political institution we have, sadly enough, is lying to you just from a different point of view. Look, I used to be a lockstep conservative Republican. The Republicans could do no wrong until they nominated Mitt Romney, and then it became abundantly clear to me that the Republican Party had morphed into the exact duplicate of the Democratic Party, the party of big government and big media and big business and K Street and Wall Street. So, yeah, I'm an anarchist in a certain sense, and I really just try to get people to understand how the system works and where it's broken, because Donald Trump is right about that. The system is rigged. It's rigged against the little person.
Can I ask you on though, from a certain level, and I remember talking with you about people like Hugh Carey, former old-time governor of New York now, I guess in the 70s, but was the system always broken, and it's just that we are now more attuned to the fact that it's always been BS, or is it that is the system, like, did the system break sometime in your lifetime where it's like there's a before and an after? Actually, and it's just more corrupt now.
I think it's always been corrupt. The difference is now you have an alternative media to underline that corruption. Before, the mainstream media, which had a monopoly on the dissemination of political information, hid the facts very effectively from the American people. Yeah. But now, with the rise of a vibrant and robust alternative media, the people are learning more about everything. And therefore the inequities and the corruption of the system has gotten coverage and come to light in a way that it hadn't previously.
Is there a way that that understanding of corruption, and I'm watching the TV show The Americans, which is in its 5th season, and it's about a sleeper couple of Soviet agents in 1980s America, and it's there's a sense where when people understand a system is corrupt, and the Soviet Union was corrupt so thoroughly that people became despondent. They killed themselves. They cheated everybody. Very low trust society. Do you think that's happening in America, where because we're being faced with the complete debasement of our civic institutions, that we just become, if everybody is corrupt, if everything is corrupt, we act poorly. How do we get back to being a high trust country with the benefits of, believing a person's word is their bond and things like that?
Well, I think you just explained the election of Donald Trump. Now, you may not agree that will be the proper manifestation of it, but the people who voted for him believe they were taking the corrective that you're talking about. They believe that was a blow against the system and a voice to clean up a corrupt system. Now, if he becomes yet another establishment neocon president, they will be sorely, sorely disappointed. And clearly, we talked about this in the first segment, he has many establishment figures around him who are seeking to homogenize him into being George W. Bush. But that's not what the people voted for. And therefore, you may have a whole nother level of disillusionment here shortly.
Wow. So just when you think you've reached the bottom, there's always another level you can go to, right? There's always a sub-basement.
Sure, and not only that, but then you'll have things like, for example, the firing of James Comey bolstered Donald Trump among his base. So although they may be upset about him going to Saudi Arabia, or they may be upset about him appearing to backtrack on climate change, or they may be unhappy that he didn't pass his travel ban, well, he fired Comey, so he's still got to be pretty good. He's still my president. So, I mean, those kind of political actions buy him time. I do think when he comes back, we are going to have some announcements about changes in the administration. I would keep an eye on David Urban, formerly Senator Arlen Specter's administrative assistant, West Point graduate, a very capable guy who ran the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania, somebody who I was disappointed didn't join the administration initially. There's some indication that he is going in a key position. So the president is going to get some people around him who are both loyal to his vision and who know how Washington works.
I'd like to ask Nick.
That sounds pretty great. Tyler, are you excited about America? I mean, you have your own story of disillusionment.
Geez. Nick, I'm interviewing you. You're not interviewing me. I'm kidding. I don't want. I wanted to ask you actually because I find you play it down the middle in many ways. The true middle, the libertarian middle, where everybody is, and I think you don't really try to suck up to any or to give paeans to any sort of side of the media establishment, but can you not look at the coverage of Donald Trump and objectively say this is just an onslaught against this man? I mean, regardless of his foibles or how much of it might be true or not.
No, I agree. I mean, at least since Bush, people have talked about derangement syndrome, Bush derangement or Obama derangement syndrome. There's no question that the media is in a fit of Trump derangement syndrome, and it's gotten to a point where it's comical, where they really, like, even the New York Times, or especially the New York Times and the mainstream media, like, they attack him and then they come back with the correctives and they dial everything back. And anybody who's associated with him, there is an onslaught, and what is problematic for me is that it blurs the places where Trump is actually, I think, is advancing individual liberty or freedom on certain levels, and certainly in his approach to regulatory issues, whether it's at the FCC or the FDA or the EPA, these are all good things, and he's forcing people to kind of own their stuff about, like, well, you know what, we don't need these regulations that went into effect 6 months ago, and like we're acting as if they came down and from the Ten Commandments or something. And I think that's great. But then, it also it gives him cover for a lot of stuff that I think is really negative and bad, when it comes to things like immigration. And I think it also pulls him off the ball of, like, getting out of lifestyle politics. The greatest thing about Trump was he was the one person who could beat Hillary Clinton, because it was like, on social issues, he was giving same-sex benefits to couples when she was still saying that a marriage could only be between a man and a woman. When her husband was making that the law of the land through the Defense of Marriage Act and whatnot. And I feel like he has been kind of shoehorned into a bunch of socially conservative positions, which are ultimately not good for the country.
No, it's interesting. You raised an excellent point. I mean, the 94 crime bill, which incarcerated an entire generation of young African Americans, is something he didn't like at the time. Now, suddenly, Jeff Sessions wants him to pin on the sheriff's badge.
Yep. Well, I want to thank Nick Gillespie. Nick, it's always a pleasure. It's too short. We hope to have you back again soon. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you.
This is the Stone Cold Truth.
Welcome back to the Stone Cold Truth. I'm your host, Roger Stone. We're broadcasting from the Stone Zone with my trusty sidekick, Tyler Nixon. And joining us now on the phone is the satirist, stand-up comedian, activist, and spokesman for the cannabis movement, Steve Burke. Welcome to the Stone Cold Truth, Steve Burke.
Hey, Roger. How you doing?
It's great to have you. I see you had some big doings out there in Denver, and you're going to tell us about it. So let me turn it over to the world's second foremost expert on cannabis, Tyler Nixon. Tyler,
Well,
put that bong down and do this radio show, would you please?
if you insist. Steve, I have to say that Steve has created the Elevationist Church here in Denver, and you've done an amazing job there, Steve. I wasn't sure what to expect. We had an opportunity to spend some time in there, and you've done a great job, a really respectful job with that facility, I must say. How long? Well, first of all, tell us about the church, and we can get into the specifics and what kind of challenges you're facing.
Yeah, so we the name of the church is called the International Church of Cannabis, and it's located in Denver, Colorado, in the West Washington Park neighborhood of the city. It is a 13,000 square foot church. It's 113 years old, and it was formerly a church called Mount Calvary Apostolic Church. And we began renovations about a year ago, and the church opened its doors for a membership drive on 4/20, on April 20th. And we had a 3-day weekend of programming with different musicians and comedians, and we had NPR radio there, and we launched this church. It's the first church in the world where you're legally allowed to consume cannabis in a social environment. And the religion that's practiced inside the church is called Elevationism. And Elevationists believe that an individual's spiritual journey and search for meaning is one of self-discovery that can be heightened and deepened with ritual cannabis use. So it's not a replacement to your existing faith. It's more of a supplement to it. You can be a practicing Christian and an Elevationist. You can be a practicing Jew and an Elevationist. You can even be a practicing atheist and be an Elevationist. As long as that you believe you can elevate yourself to a better version of self through the sacrament of cannabis, you are an Elevationist.
Well, amen to that. I certainly agree with everything on that front. It definitely is an elevating and enlightening substance for sure. What are the challenges? Having been involved myself with the I-300 campaign here in Denver to permit social use, and for the listeners who don't know, while cannabis is legal throughout Colorado in various forms, you cannot consume it anywhere publicly, or at least in any kind of social environment, and it's been a real problem because it pushes people out into the street to do it. Businesses who would want to welcome guests or who would want to consume on site are prohibited from doing that, and so it's been an ongoing campaign against that. Have you faced any real challenges from the city of Denver or anything concerning this? Because obviously you're coming under a religious freedom rubric, but what are the challenges ahead?
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Colorado pioneered the recreational marijuana movement. It was the first to move in that space. And while it's been an incredible success from many different, performance indicators, crime has gone down, real estate values have gone up, people have jobs, the schools are getting more money because the funding was regulated to go towards education. While it's been an incredibly positive 4-year experiment, one thing that's not legal is for anybody to actually consume marijuana anywhere other than their house. So, we created a safe place for people that use cannabis and want to have a place where they can feel free from being prosecuted or arrested. People use cannabis for spiritual purposes, and there have been some challenges. The city, asked to meet with us, and we had a meeting with the city attorney's office before we opened, and there's a whole argument of what's public versus private. If you're a church and you're a private residence and you're a private religious organization, how do you prevent someone from just walking off the street and coming into your church and smoking a joint? So there have been some challenges. We are a members-only, invite-only, consumption-friendly venue. So what that means is that you have to be invited to services or you have to be on a list to get in and consume cannabis in there. But our church is open to the public for those who want to see the magnificent art. It's open to the public every day from Thursday to Sunday, 1 to 3 p.m. And for those that don't know, our church has two world-famous artists that contributed magnificent murals to the space. The inside of the church was painted by a Madrid-based artist named Okuda San Miguel. And the outside of the church, there's a huge 30-foot mural painted by L.A. street artist Kenny Scharf. For those that don't know, Kenny Scharf is one of the original SoHo village artists of the 1980s, amongst the quartet with Andy Warhol, Jean-Michel Basquiat, and Keith Haring, whom he lived with in the 1980s. So, we do have arguably the most significant public mural in the state of Colorado on the front of our church right now.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that it is beautifully done, Steve. That ceiling is amazing. I mean, it must have taken, 6 months at least, I would think, to get that whole thing done?
It's funny that you asked that because, we get various guesses at how long it took to paint the ceiling. And for those that haven't seen the ceiling, you can go to internationalchurchofcannabis.com. And there's a 360-degree tour of the entire church inside. The ceiling is like the Sistine Chapel for stoners. It's unbelievable. And believe it or not, it only took 6 days to complete.
Oh, my God. That's amazing.
That was it. And on the seventh day, they rested.
That guy's a genius, whoever. What was his name again?
His name is Okuda. Yeah, he's a graffiti artist. He does large murals all over the world. His Instagram is Okuda Art, Okudart. You can see some of his works. He's blowing up in the world. Like, we were in the New York Times on April 20th, and Alicia Keys saw that article and flew him to her house the next day, and he painted Alicia Keys' ceiling in her home in New York.
That's great. So, do you see this expanding beyond Denver? Have you had interest from around the country or elsewhere?
I actually think the number one email that we're receiving from our website is people that want to open up branches in their city. So, it's been really interesting. We're not quite ready for expansion yet. I think we have to prove the model in Denver first. But we're definitely interested in moving into other cities. That elevationists exist everywhere. There's no need to convert to elevationism. You are an elevationist if you use cannabis to elevate your life. And so there's no singular dogma that we preach in our church. We welcome people of all faiths and cultures. And what you find is that people have been practicing elevationism for all the way dating back to ancient China, thousands of years ago. We don't claim that we invented this new religion. We just gave it a title and a place of worship.
Well, as I said, I keep saying it again, but amen to that. I mean, I was raised Catholic and certainly hold to, Christian faith generally, although I'm sort of not quite practicing. But I have to say that I've always felt this plant was a gift to mankind from God, to humankind from God. And it's just it almost to me is a crime against humanity, that the way it's been treated for the last 100 years. And I'm glad to see what you've done and what you've been able to do in terms of calling it a sacrament in many ways, because I think 50, 100 years from now, when we've finally loosed the chains that have been on this simple plant, I think we're going to find it has so many cures beyond even what we know now for human maladies that we will look back upon cannabis prohibition as being barbaric.
Well, and this fight is about to be joined. I mean, my greatest disappointment is that candidate Donald Trump took the correct position in the campaign, that although he personally doesn't favor the legalization of marijuana, it's a states' rights issue. And if the states want to do that, he said it's okay with him. Now in comes Jeff Sessions and, even worse, the Homeland Security Secretary Kelly. These guys sound like they just stepped out of the movie Reefer Madness. It's a gateway drug. We got to crack down on marijuana. This is an extraordinary waste of government resources. Not happening, folks. Not while I'm breathing.
Steve Burke.
And I agree with you, Roger. I think it's a political blunder that they're going to make, and they're going to realize how unpopular it is.
Well, I want to thank you, Steve, for joining us. You're listening to The Stone Cold Truth.
Hi, this is Bernie Sanders. And believe me, I know you may not believe me, but you gotta believe me. In my opinion, I like the Stone Cold Truth, and I listen to it.
And rolling through this beautiful Saturday afternoon of Memorial Day weekend, here on the Stone Cold Truth, broadcasting from the Stone Zone on Genesis Communications Network. I am your co-host Tyler Nixon, of course, Roger Stone, the man after whom the Stone Cold Truth is named, and joining us, Luke Rosiak. Is that how you pronounce your last name, Luke?
You got it.
And Luke is an intrepid reporter, journalist with the Daily Caller, which is, if you haven't checked it out or don't know about the Daily Caller, please immediately run to that website. It is an excellent news resource, very objective, very down the middle, very scrupulous, I found. I've never read anything in there that was wild or far-flung. And Luke is joining us to discuss what is a fascinating, to me, series of articles that have been that he has brought out. And I'm just going to let you take it away, Luke, but I'll just preface it by saying it basically involves the House Representatives, the House Democrats, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and the information technology, or IT, of the House Democrats, or at least some of them. But Luke, give us just run us through it, because it's a little complicated, but it's just fascinating, and I can't believe it's not being covered by larger resources.
It is complicated, but back in February, the Capitol Police announced that 5 IT staffers who worked for members of Congress, setting up their accounts, plugging in mice, doing all that stuff, were banned from campus because they were criminal suspects in a major, essentially, hacking investigation. Politico reported at the time as just sort of a minor item that really didn't get any attention. Politico said the 5 men are accused of stealing equipment from members' offices without their knowledge and committing serious, potentially illegal violations on the House IT network. So I looked into this a little further. They didn't name these guys. And I found that it was basically this one guy named Imran Awan, who's from Pakistan, and he started working for Debbie Wasserman Schultz way back in 2005. So right after that, his relatives all start appearing on the payroll. He puts his 2 brothers there, he puts his wife there, he puts his brother's wife there, he puts his best friend, and he gets members of Congress, different members of Congress, dozens of them, to put his relatives on the payroll, even though most of them apparently never really came in, didn't necessarily even have computer knowledge. So all of them are listed at chief of staff level salaries, making $170,000 each, including his 20-year-old brother. So this has gone on for years, and, somehow people kind of knew about it, but no one really did anything about it. Finally, the Capitol Police close in. And yet we see a weird reaction from members of Congress. Instead of being like, we take this very seriously, this is a serious matter, they've been fired, we trusted the wrong people, we got burned by our staff, but, we're going to take all the right precautions, we're going to audit our systems. Debbie Wasserman Schultz didn't even fire the guy, neither did a couple of other members. And they just said, well, we're going to just see what happens. Even though they're banned from campus, Wasserman Schultz changed this guy's title from IT guy to advisor, so that he's not allowed to touch a computer, but he can advise her. So the reaction of members of Congress in downplaying this was kind of the first sign that something was odd.
Well,
so then,
didn't he flee to Pakistan? I thought it. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it was months ago now that the Capitol Police announced their suspect, but they didn't make any arrests. And now the wife, who was on staff of all these members, including members of the Intelligence Committee, has gone back to Pakistan. She's withdrawn her kids from school in Virginia and gone back to Pakistan. So, there are obvious flight risks, and in fact, one of them did flee. So you look into these guys' backgrounds, and it's wild. I mean, these are not just normal guys who worked in IT and happen to be from Pakistan. There's nothing normal about them. There's lawsuits left and right. Everyone they meet seems to think that they're a con artist and get into some kind of financial dispute. Their own mother is their stepmother is in a legal battle with them right now, in which she says that they wiretapped her and used hidden devices plugged into her computer to monitor her every move, and they told her she's not allowed to leave the house. And the purpose here was to get her to sign a power of attorney that would give them access to money that was stored in Pakistan. So it was basically an extortion scheme that relied on high-tech, on their IT skills. And that's their own relatives saying that in public court documents that are online. So we know that these guys have a
unthirstable quench for money, and that they have IT skills that they use in pursuit of that. And yet members of Congress are saying, don't worry, there wasn't any hacking. But
to put a finer point on the influence that these, ostensible IT guys have over the House Democrat members, there was one example where, well, first of all, they weren't even really doing their jobs, as I understand it. They would come in, if a lowly staffer had an IT problem, it was like whatever, it would take weeks or months to get a response. They would only deal with actual members' systems. And in one instance, there were some invoices to be paid for work, and one of the staffers said, I'm not going to pay these invoices until you guys get this right. And that person, apparently the lead Pakistani guy, went to that member of Congress, and that staffer was fired as a result of that, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, if you complain about these guys not doing their jobs, it's the person who complains who gets fired. Members of Congress seem to have been protective of them. They were charging way inflated prices, and there's a company that provides similar services, and they came in and they said, we know what you're paying. We can do it for a quarter of that. And the members of Congress said, "No, we're going to stick with what we're doing."
Yeah.
And the company at the time said, "Why would that be?"
Yeah, and actually do the job, because as I understand it, the audits that were done sort of by these other, the other contractors that were looking for, to do the work, I think they'd examined some of the work that was done by these guys, or there was some sort of audit, and said that they were just absolutely, I hate to use the word, piss poor performance. They were not doing the job, period. And here's another I just found astonishing. They were running. First of all, they were keeping, as I understand it, all these. The servers were off-site. They were, in other words, sending data to off-site servers, which was, as I understand it, either a violation if not of law, certainly of House procedures, and for the protection of data that could involve the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, but also that they ran and controlled all these accounts through one email account that was connected. Get this, folks, to iTunes. I mean, this is cartoonish, actually, if you think about it. And getting to the core of it here, I mean, what is the possible suggestion behind this? That basically because they had access to all the information, literally everything that was run through any member's systems there, that they have got dirt on people. I mean, I kind of guess that seems to be why the Democrats would be acting the way they do. There's no other reason that I can think of.
And there was a big story this week where Debbie Wasserman Schultz, she's on the committee that sets the Capitol Police's budget. And the Capitol Police have some of her equipment as part of this criminal investigation. You would think that you would have heard about that from the media, because they're always talking about all these other hacking on political and government bodies, and those are very important and legitimate stories. But this is virtually identical, and yet you never hear about it. But the Capitol Police have seized her equipment, and she threatened the Capitol Police and said she's going to take away funding from them, or there's going to be consequences, or what her words were, Luke, if they didn't return the evidence.
I really appreciate your coming on. Luke Rosiak, Daily Caller. Check him out. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thank you.
You're listening to The Stone Cold Truth.
Hi, this is former President Jimmy Carter. Rosalind and I like the Stone Cold Truth because, like me, Roger Stone always tells the truth.
Well, we are returning. We are back here on the Stone Cold Truth with Roger Stone and Tyler Nixon, our very special guest, Vince Palomaro, who is the foremost authority, I would say, in the world, frankly, on the Secret Service, the United States Secret Service. Vince, I don't know of anybody who has a larger body of work or done more research or has more intimate contact with agents throughout the years than you. I mean, I don't want you to have to toot your own horn, but isn't that correct?
I'll be honest with you. I really appreciate you, and I'm humble about it. I just think maybe it's by default. Yeah, the only asterisk would be Ronald Kessler, but frustratingly, he always uses an anonymous source. A lot of times he doesn't name the agents he speaks to. So other than maybe Kessler, and that's a footnote. Yeah, I think definitely from the Kennedy years, no doubt about that, and on older agents, definitely.
Right.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Now, where can folks find your writings and your various? I know you have a blog spot, I believe, but give us all where they can find you.
Yeah, in the interest of time, the easiest way to do it would literally be Google or any other search engine. Just put my name in, Vince Palomera. It's always Palamara, Palomera. And you can find my, my blogs and my YouTube channel and whatnot, but also will come up right away on the first page is my 3 books. And they're available via Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and such, and Kindle and paperback. So, yeah.
And the first two, the first 2 books, Survivor's Guilt and the From Parkland to Bethesda, definitely want to check those out. And I want to just reiterate what Roger, or affirm what Roger said. I have immense respect for you, Vince, amongst all the different researchers, because you took on what has been mythologized, the Kennedy detail, even though they got the president killed. And if you believe what I believe, that there were folks inside the Secret Service who were part of the conspiracy. There's no doubt about it. And it was a setup. I mean, particularly who was the agent who stood up and waved off the 2 agents from the back of the car?
Oh, yeah, Emery Roberts.
Emery Roberts, right.
In Roger Stone's book. Yeah, definitely. Emery Roberts is one of the 3, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Well, and as I was beginning to tell you, I had the opportunity last week to interview the daughter of Robert Burke. Robert Burke started as a line agent in the Secret Service. He guarded President John Kennedy. He guarded President Lyndon Johnson, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, ultimately guarded President Richard Nixon, was brought out of retirement on several occasions for special events during the time of President Ronald Reagan. Believe it or not, recently the service asked him if he would come back as a consultant on some security issues pertaining to the current president, and he declined. He had 2 functions when he was guarding Kennedy. He can be seen in many of Kennedy's pictures. He was an actual bodyguard, usually within a few feet of the president, but in the motorcade, he is the guy who sat in the back of the truck with the machine gun, with his eyes perched on high buildings and high windows. That he was an expert marksman, and those were his 2 functions. He would ultimately rise to be the number 2 man in the agency. On November 22nd, he was called in by his superiors and told that he was being taken off the detail and being sent to the LBJ Ranch. He had never been taken off a detail before. Because he was a big burly Irishman, he had kind of a special rapport with Jack Kennedy, but of course he followed orders. It was while he was at the LBJ Ranch, where the president and the vice president were expected later in the day, that he heard John Kennedy had been killed on his way to the ranch. He has never spoken of this before.
That's amazing, and that kind of brings us
wow.
interestingly to the astonishing story of Tom Shipman. Why don't you run us through that real quick, Vince?
Wow, I appreciate the information from Roger. Thank you on that. Thomas Shipman this all came about in 1997. Thomas Shipman was basically an unknown agent at that time. I came across an obscure manuscript of Colonel George McNally. He was the White House Signal Corps officer, former Secret Service agent, too. We'll make a long story very short in the interest of time. He passed away in 1970, and his widow came out with basically a Xerox copy of an unpublished manuscript. And in that manuscript I came across, he mentions one of JFK's driver agents, Thomas Shipman, died suddenly. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, wow, I've never heard that. I've never seen that. It's not in any books, nowhere. It's like it never existed other than this, this manuscript. So just through, researching, I found out, my God, he passed away, and this is all documented in the book. There's no doubt about this. October 14th, 1963, he died of an alleged heart attack of all places, Camp David. And I go into this, and it turns out he just had an annual physical. He's a driver agent, so he's even more important than the actual, quote-unquote, regular agents that guarded the president, in this case, Kennedy. And now everybody talks about the mysterious deaths of people after the assassination. This guy died about a month before, and ironically, and you can take this 2 ways, he definitely could have been, and maybe even should have been, the agent who would have drove Kennedy in Dallas. I was contacted a couple of years ago out of the blue by surviving members of his family, and after documenting their bona fides and speaking to them on the phone and so forth, It turns out that they've been in seclusion all these years. They're not looking for money or fame. They lead private lives, and that's the way they want to keep it. They told me, yes. Oh, yeah. My mother said that they were encouraged to bury him right away. He was buried basically without an autopsy, other than a country doctor saying he died of a heart attack. There was no toxicology tests run. He was buried 2 days after he died of an alleged heart attack. And as we know, many times with intelligence agencies, you can be quote unquote heart attacked. And without toxicology tests to see if there's any kind of chemical inducement of that, well, then we have to take the guy's word at it without any kind of real forensic evidence. 2 days later, he's buried. But the most important thing is the family said that, the Shipman family had roots in Dallas. He was looking forward to the Texas trip, Tom Shipman was, because he was looking to be part of that trip. He was concerned about Kennedy's safety, and the family members are still bitter about Bill Greer, the agent who actually drove Case at all. If that would have been my dad, Kennedy would survive Dallas, and then Greer was totally inept, and my dad was so concerned he would have swerved the car, this, that, and the other. So not only did they come away with, again, these disparaging remarks about Tom Shipman's replacement, they confirmed, my family was encouraged to bury my father right away, and they agreed that there was no true autopsy. So it's definitely grist in the middle. And in the next,
The reason that's important for the more novice listeners is that Bill Greer was the actual driver in Dallas during the motorcade, and during the shooting, he hit the brakes on the limousine, and that is without doubt. You can see in the Mormon film, or not the Mormon film, the one of the, I forget which one, the Nix film, I believe. You can see the brake lights come on. So this man, in the middle of the shooting, slowed the car down, and there are witnesses who say the car came to a complete halt. And he kept, and this is if you see in the the infamous Zapruder film, he looks back twice. He jerks his head back twice to look. And it's like, what are you looking at? Hit the accelerator pedal, pal. I mean, it's just, this is the man. He had one job. That was
complete violation of policy. We know, of course, that Lyndon Johnson purloined the Secret Service manual as early as 1961 and spirited it to his personal attorney, Ed Clark, for study. So they were well aware of all of the procedures that weren't followed in Dallas. No agents interspersed throughout the crowd. No search and sealing of the high buildings on either side of Dealey Plaza. The incorrect number, as Vince has said, of motorcycles. Agents not on the bumper. All of these procedures, which had by and large been followed in Kennedy's trip to Miami and his trip to, I believe, was Chicago, are ignored.
Mm-hmm.
Are ignored in Dallas. Just ignored.
We have about a minute and a half left, Vince, and we haven't even gotten to it yet. But you became friends with Agent D. Prospero. His name is, I believe.
Yes, Robert.
And he was
Prospero.
a Reagan.
He was
Prospero, right?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Number one agent for Reagan. He took over for Jerry Parr. He was Jerry Parr's direct assistant. And ironically, De Prospero contacted me out of the blue, and he said, "I'm a big fan of your work. I admire your research." I couldn't believe it. This guy, I'm criticizing, guys that when he first joined the agency, and he's a big fan. He actually invited me to Thanksgiving dinner this past year. Unfortunately, we couldn't. We already had a commitment, but I was deeply touched by that. But yeah, he's a big fan. I wrote he is the ops of the agents of the Kennedy detail. This guy is one of, if not the best ever. He's the reason why we go through magnetometers. But whenever we see the president, he basically invented that, for lack of a better way of putting it. It's the reason why I have agents in the hospitals whenever a president comes to town. He invoked so many modern security measures because he never wanted to have an assassination or even a high-publicized assassination attempt happen again. This guy is just unbelievable. Yeah, he was the man, so... Yeah.
I can't think of a better endorsement of your work. I mean, from him. And, Vince, thank you so much for joining us. I wish we had more time. Check out Vince Palomaro's books, Survivor's Guilt, From Parkland to Bethesda, and now the newest one, The Not-So-Secret Service. Great stuff. Vince, thank you for joining us.
These books are indispensable, folks. If you want to know what happened on November 22nd, 1963, you've got to read Vince